mail-in voting is going to rig the election. I really do.
Are you suggesting that you might not accept the results of the election?
I have to see.
Can you give a direct answer? You will accept the election?
I have to see. Look, I have to see. No, I'm not going to just say yes. I'm not going to say no, and I didn't last time either.
And the president is also transparent about why he's in such a rush to get a new Supreme Court justice seated.
I think this will end up in the Supreme Court, and I think it's very important that we have 9 justices. This scam that the Democrats are pulling, it's a scam. This scam will be before the United States Supreme Court.
Now, Trump's rhetoric is making a lot of people more than a little nervous. I'm going to quote here from a piece in The Atlantic that I felt did a really good job of describing what we could be looking at. The headline, the election that could break America. Quote, the worst case is that he uses his power to prevent a decisive outcome against him. If Trump sheds all restraint and if his Republican allies play the parts he assigns them, he could obstruct the emergence of a legally unambiguous victory for Biden in the Electoral College and then in Congress. He could prevent the formation of consensus about whether there is any outcome at all. He could seize on that uncertainty to hold on to power. I want to bring in our guest, former Watergate prosecutor Nick Akerman, who is also an assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. And a lot to unpack, but first let's start off with the immediacy. And it's just, to me, crazy, Nick, when I talk to all these folks every day and they say, well, you know what, maybe he'll win by enough, Biden will, that none of this will be immaterial, as if you got to win an election like it's covering a point spread here to have legitimacy, but that's where we're at. Do you think the fears that the president, A, will not go quietly, which I think aren't fears, I think we should take them almost as fact, but that all the other parts, whether they be the courts here or the state electors or whatever the case may be, do you think they're being a little overhyped right now? That if it looks like he's lost, and even if he wants to declare victory prematurely, folks won't go along to get along?
Yeah, I think that part of it is being overhyped, but you can't lose sight of what Trump is doing. He is out there actively suppressing the vote. He's trying to make people feel that their vote won't count, that they shouldn't vote. And that's why you see Joe Biden looking straight into the camera and telling the American public, get out there and vote, as if your life depended on it. I think that's the key. I mean, everything he's doing, he is coordinating probably the most massive voter suppression conspiracy that we've ever seen in this country. And he's got lots of lawyers in every state trying to take advantage of anything they can to try and push back the vote.
Let me get to the next part, which is the Supreme Court. And you heard the clip I played. Most people looked at the ruling by the Supreme Court regarding Pennsylvania and when ballots can be accepted, assuming they're postmarked before the election day. And so, wait, that was a victory here for Democrats here. You'll be able to count the votes. But my reading of it was a little different. It was a 4-4 ruling. And I think most people out there think, oh, well, it's a constitutionally protected right to vote. That's not what the Constitution says. Every state, 49 of the 50 actually, I think Arizona the exception, they come up with their own election laws and their own voting laws. 4 of the 8 justices on the Supreme Court basically said, no, we want to have a crack at this. If Coney Barrett is confirmed, as we expect, before the election, and she shares the viewpoint of the Alitos and the Thomases, are you concerned that a Supreme Court might decide, hey, you know what? We'll decide what's acceptable or what's not acceptable about when a ballot is cast and when it ought to be counted?
Well, that's only going to happen if there's really an issue after the election. I mean, don't forget, we had this happen with Bush v. Gore, which was a super unusual situation. I mean, we had 150 some odd votes separating the 2 candidates in Florida. And it was very contentious in the state courts and then in the federal courts. I mean, it takes a lot for an issue to actually go before the United States Supreme Court. Could that happen here? Sure. I mean, it could always happen, but it's not a sure thing by any stretch of the imagination. On the other hand, what you point out is absolutely correct, that we're dealing with a new justice that is more likely than not to join the, vote suppression group on the Supreme Court and vote to cut back on people's right to vote. So, yes, it's a concern, but it's somewhat hypothetical at this point.
To me, let's say you and I are on the same page, which is I don't put anything by Trump and what he's already telegraphed he's prepared to do. But let's say people walk back from the cliff here a little bit, and even if he wants to go there, the rest of at least the branches of government won't follow him. You still have the issue about this is a president who is really facing a slew of problems. And there was an opinion piece on CNN.com by the former White House press secretary, Joe Lockhart, who I thought raised interesting points. You're the perfect guy to talk to given your experience at Watergate. Lockhart says, if the president loses, his selfishness and his self-interest could cause him to cut a deal to leave peacefully to save his reputation and to avoid legal problems. Now, we're talking about both criminal and civil, Nick, and you know from your time at the Southern District, you got obstructing of justice, you got tax fraud, you got defrauding the Treasury, and then you've got what's not criminal right now, but at the minimum, he is owing creditors north of $400 million. Some people put the number closer to $1 billion right now. We have never tested constitutionally self-pardoning. You've heard all the theories that, would Pence basically, absolve him or at least give him a pardon if he stepped down before the end of January. None of that, though, obviates some exposure you would have at your old stomping grounds, whether it be at the Southern District or the Eastern District or any of the state courts here, who could have some of those cases that Mueller handed over. Give me a scenario, a plausible one, where you think, where people say, listen, somebody can go to Trump and say, the 60-plus days between the election and between the next swearing in of the president, God knows the havoc he could cause in this country if he does not go quietly into the good night. Do you think it's plausible that we have a scenario, whether it involves a pardon or some sort of a deal here, where he's going to be forced to behave himself if he wants to basically get a favorable outcome?
Well, the problem with any kind of a deal is there are too many decision makers and too many people that have to be dealt with. First of all, you point out the state courts, the state system, any kind of pardon that Pence would give him, or if he could self-pardon, which I don't think would be constitutional, that wouldn't absolve him from tax charges in New York State. It wouldn't charge him for other kinds of charges that could be brought in New York State based on the Russian interference in 2016. It wouldn't absolve him from a whole series of state court situations. And it's not just the state of New York. And so you've got just too many decision makers. I mean, first of all, Trump doesn't know how to make a deal, even though he wrote the book, The Art of the Deal. He's never made a good deal on anything for himself. And there's just too many decision makers. What does he do about the $400 million that's owed to some unknown individual or foreign government or entity? We don't know who that is. There is no way he can make a deal that would absolve himself of all of the problems that he's created and has set himself up for.
Nick, I've asked you this before over the years, but I'm sure you thought after Watergate and your work there that you would never have seen a level of corruption that you saw. It's incomparable. It's so much worse what we're going through right now. Give the public an idea from a perspective. You were looking around at people, there were patriots at least in the room. Where I'm wondering is, for crying out loud, all we can say about Barry Goldwater, he knew where the line was. I'm just wondering, where are the other Republicans? And if you agree with me, I think you do, what we're dealing with is president far worse than even what Nixon did. Are you shocked by the, if not the omission, maybe even some of the abetting of what he's doing?
Oh, there's no question about it. I mean, look at just what he was impeached on with respect to Ukraine. I mean, that in itself was an obvious extortion and shakedown of the Ukrainian government to try and get them to announce an investigation into Joe Biden. I mean, he knew back then that the one candidate that would really pose the biggest challenge to him would be Joe Biden. And he laser focused in on that. But it looks like Trump has had a history, starting with his father, with setting up a phony company to move money from his father to him so he could evade taxes on the states, on gift tax. Everything he does is done with an eye towards cheating somebody, cheating the government, cheating other people, cheating vendors. He's got a whole history of this, and he's done the same thing in the government, and he's brought the same group of grifters into the government that basically follow his lead. I mean, they're all there to line their own pockets. We have never, ever had an administration like this.
Nick Akerman, thank you as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Up next, just about every day we hear about another Republican or former Trump administration official who's now supporting Joe Biden. After the break, we're going to show you just how unprecedented this change of heart is.